Yeah, great. Sit next to me. That's exactly what I wanted. Okay, let me. It's like, okay, I'm gonna try. I'm gonna do my best. Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much. All of your talks were absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure the audience is also happy. We have plenty of questions now, so I'm just gonna go ahead and start directly. Plenty of those are related to you, Sebastian, and I would like to start with probably the most important one. What is your workout routine? No, joking aside, let's. You can answer that in the context of the habitat.
Yeah.
How do you actually maintain physical form if you stay there for 100 days?
It's actually a good question. It is one of the major issues about space that we haven't solved yet. So when you are in a reduced gravity environment, you will experience muscle and bone atrophy quite rapidly. The astronauts in orbit, they lose about 1% of their density of bone and muscle a month. So you can just count up 10 months, that's a lot of material that gets lost. So they work out intensively. And I am also incredibly passionate about finding the smallest multifunctional workout devices that exist. So I have a list of my favorite miniaturized workout machines. And there's a new machine that we are testing out in our next habitat called the Vitruvian form, which is just it's a thin plate on the floor that actually, it's almost made for space. It's cables, and then you have resistance in some electrical motors, and it emulates gravity. So you can just pull some cables, and you can emulate 200 kilos of deadlift.
Yeah. So no folding bench press, as somebody suggested here.
Yeah.
So it's not that. How about your psychological form? I mean, what you've been through sounds horrifying, to be honest. So can you talk a bit about your psychological condition? Like, what was happening in your mind? How did it reflect on your dreams? It's like I'm trying to combine a bunch of questions that we have.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. So first of all, going to these places and living in these conditions is a dream of mine, right? So I go into it with a different mindset than most people probably would. It was not supposed to be funny, but, oh.
What is happening? Oh, that's happening. Okay, great.
Okay, all right.
Fantastic. You're fired.
Okay, that's
focus,
good.
Focus, Sebastian.
Yeah. So I go into these places with I dream about it, but I mean that in a literal sense, because what happens is, for example, when we went to Greenland, I didn't have time to explain that, but we had a polar bear encounter, and of all the different things that could happen in Greenland, polar bears was actually statistically not the most dangerous thing, but I think intuitively it is the most dangerous, like, because humans respond, like, it's very difficult to grasp the danger of wind, right? Like, it's like very, like, okay, you know, it's almost like an invisible force. But what I experienced was that in the months leading up to the mission, subconsciously in my dreams, I would actually dream about polar bears. And it was a repeating dream. And in the beginning, I was always eaten, and slowly, over the many months, I started winning in the dreams as well. So I think there was a progress going on. And then one week it would be about frostbite, and another week it would be about something else. So I think, I don't know if it's just me, but I experienced this kind of subconscious preparation before the missions.
Plenty of follow-up questions coming. Okay, a question to you, Stephen. We do know that one of the laws of physics is about entropy, that, you know, a system tends towards chaos. So the way that the question is formulated, if the universe tends towards entropy, what drove the primordial jump towards orderly, self-replicating matter we call life?
Yes, so there is this concept called entropy, right? That you go from order to disorder. Many people have heard of it. But you know, this is a universal tendency, as you mentioned. But it does not mean that local increase in order cannot happen. None of the systems that we live in, either in a habitat, in a planet, in a solar system, in some corner of the galaxy somewhere, is a closed system. Energy can go into that system and cause a local increase in complexity. But there's a competition. There's a competition that most do not consider, and I wanted to touch on this morning, and this gives me an opportunity to circle back to it. Because entropy ought to increase. You called it chaos. There are many other ways to describe it. But complexity can also increase. Complexity of a chemical network, complexity of a computer network, the latest Windows patch could fail, right? So what is the optimal complexity in light of increasing entropy? If we could come up with the answer to that, please let me know, because that gives us an opportunity to shake hands with the King and Queen of Sweden. We only know that local increases in complexity are not uncommon, but what is uncommon is translating that to something that remains complex and doesn't follow a runaway. And probably what you have to do is capture it before it gets into a runaway system.
Related to complexity again, why is that too much complexity in non-organic structures need to be simplified? I mean, what's the problem with just having complex structures and no life?
Now, for those of you who like, maybe you have a sweet tooth and you'd like to have some caramel on your ice cream. What you do is you take a pan, right, and heat it up with some sugar on it. The sugar will caramelize. Maybe you add a little bit of water to it and so forth. What that does is it takes the smaller sugar molecules and links them up into longer and longer chains. Left unattended, it turns to charcoal. This happens in prebiotic experiments too. Unattended by a prebiotic chemist, prebiotic chemicals continuously mixed into a reaction chamber end up as tar, end up as asphalt. That is what we have to overcome. We have to remove getting too complex so that it becomes unusable. And that is the increase in entropy and the increase in complexity and finding that sweet spot there in experimental space.
Okay, we will need some time to digest that.
That just gives you a sense of
yes,
what we're dealing with. Now, okay, but there is something about gravity that I'd like to mention, because we brought this up, right? What do you do as a life form which has evolved in gravity? Now, if you have a resistance device, you know, that seems to be fine for muscle tone, but it doesn't provide the stress on the organism, on our endoskeleton, right? That gravity does. It provides an overall stress. And this is what concerns me about space exploration. Everybody, we do not confidently know how to keep people alive. We don't know how to keep people alive for the 3 to 6 months it would take, even in a fast spaceship, to get to Mars. All of our experiments are on Earth, under very controlled conditions or in a near space environment. To me, I don't see humans colonizing space in the bodies that we have.
Do you have an opinion on that? Because you're constantly trying to kill yourself to prove otherwise.
I think I'm more optimistic. I guess I've also set up my entire life on this, so there's a bias
Still
here.
alive.
But I'm more optimistic. I think there's definitely some challenges. I think we've definitely kept people alive for 3 to 6 months in space, up to a year. Of course, not under the same amount of radiation and stuff that we would experience going to Mars. But I think it is challenges that can be overcome. It is crazy how little we know about the human body in space. I think there's been close to 600 people in space. I mean, I think the Wright brothers, if I'm not mistaken, the Wright brothers that invented the airplane as we know it, were alive when humans landed on the moon, right? It's not that far apart, you know.
What? That can't be true.
I think so.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
okay.
and since then there has been around 600 people in space. So, for example, now we are doing a project in space measuring how light influences the circadian rhythm in sleeping. The issue is imagine that you're doing a medical study for a new experimental drug and you only have 1 or 2 candidates to test on. And that's the issue we face with space, is that the candidates that we can test on is very limited. But I'm confident we will be in space or we will be on Mars within my little boy is 18 years old.
Cool. All right. We needed that optimistic outlook. Look, a couple of questions for you. You ended up with quantum computing, and you did say something that some of the people here are challenging. You're saying that quantum computing doesn't still exist, and the question is, by non-existent, do you actually mean that there are not enough stable qubits for practical purposes yet? Yes. Because we have like IBM, they already have a publicly accessible computer.
Yes, there are a number of publicly accessible quantum computers that are not quantum computers. They don't have the power to run quantum algorithms that are of particular significance. So they run a few qubits, but I mentioned the fact that there is an algorithm called Shor's algorithm that would break the existing cryptography. Well, you need hundreds of qubits to be able to do that. And these days we are about at 8, 16, something. And it's actually a bit tricky because people don't really tell the full story about it. So we don't really have quantum supremacy yet, namely a quantum computer that is more powerful than the existing computers. All the claims that have been made in recent years about quantum supremacy are either false or non-verifiable, or they are true, but they are on a very, very, very specific problem. And then that computer would fail on all the other problems. So it's not something that I would consider quantum supremacy. Now, my wife, she works on quantum machine learning. She would probably kill me this evening, but nobody's going to tell her, right, that I said this. But
we are recording this. Yeah.
Exactly, we are recorded, but she's in Italy. It's okay. But we don't really have strong, powerful quantum computers.
And why is that?
Because...
What is the main hurdle?
Because of physics. Ultimately, the main problem is a very similar problem to the one that Sebastian is tackling. Quantum bits interfere with each other. And in order to prevent interference, you need to cool them down. And the amount of energy needed to actually cool them. So basically, you need to imagine your new quantum computer is a huge fridge, okay? And the amount of energy that you would need to actually make sure that the bits don't interfere with each other, and if they do interfere, then they don't work that well anymore, is such that we don't have that capacity yet. It's not a matter of money, it's just a matter of technology. Now, are we getting there? Yes, I believe we will get there. When? I don't know. But do we have working quantum computers these days? Yes, but they're incredibly limited. So no breaking of encryption yet, not by far.
I heard you sigh, Stephen. Do you want to replicate?
I do.
Yeah,
I sigh for the Earth? Because this is another paper tiger, right? Consider the environmental impact of cryptocurrency mining. Now consider the environmental impact of quantum computing, where even a simple, relatively simple quantum system requires enormous energy resources. The load then on the environment will just continue to increase. And
well, they did say that the prerequisite for getting there is, or AI, all the discussions around AI is to actually have a real breakthrough in the way that we produce energy. So it is the prerequisite to get there, as far as I understand. So it can't happen without a clean source of energy and an abundant one.
Yeah, is our development then as a civilization in all of these different directions, looking inward, looking outward, looking around, expanding our presence in the solar system, in enhancing our ability to function in an increasingly complex society, ultimately determined by the availability of energy resources. And it's fusion energy, which is that golden ring that we've been pursuing for decades, that seems still just out of reach.
Hopefully we'll get there. Now,
or we invent a completely different system. I mean, we don't know, for quantum computing, yes, it's all quantum computers. I don't know. Actually, I wanted to say, people can maybe fly to Mars, but they'd be killed by a computer virus because it will shut down the spaceship.
Jesus. That's one more scenario I didn't think of.
It is not an unlikely scenario, right?
Yeah.
I broke the system here. Imagine the system that you would need to fly in space.
Well, that's not really a spacecraft,
No, but what I'm saying is, and that is the beauty of science, right? We don't have a system that allows us to have quantum computers that are powerful enough. And the only way we can think of realizing it right now is to actually have these huge fridges and everything where you work. But on the other hand, 70 years ago, the first computers were as large as this cube. Now, on my phone, I have a computer that is tremendously more powerful than the computers that brought people to the moon.
Correct.
So the advances that we have made in 50, 60, 70 years, the Wright brothers were a little bit more than 100 years ago, and now we send a spaceship to Mars with the Mars rover and everything. So the advances that we can make as a species are so huge that maybe somebody in the next few years will tell us, you know what, you don't need to solve interference through the refrigeration. There is another way to do it. And that might be the breakthrough. But we don't know. We need science to help us.
Yeah, and it does sound like we need a fundamental breakthrough in physics, and not many people are actually optimistic. I mean, some call it the end of physics. That way we've reached some limitation of what we can actually know and do with the discipline. But yes,
it's the end of imagination, right? So,
of course, yes. Going back to the questions now, Stephen, you were generous enough with your time to talk to people during the exhibit out there, but for the people that didn't manage to actually talk to you, can you talk us through some of the specimens that are there? Because there are questions related here to the specimen from Mars, for example. How do we know it's from Mars? Let's start with that. How do we know it's from Mars?
Look, if I was at, by the way, that space habitat looked really cool.
Yeah.
And right, I loved how it was kind of an accordion, but walking around there, I noticed immediately there were pebbles and rocks and so on everywhere. Looking at these cabinets over here, it looks like any old piece of gravel, right? Oh, maybe Steve is just tricking us, and how do we know this is from Mars or the moon or whatever? Well, nature brings us these samples because Mars is close to the asteroid belt. It gets hammered, Mars is smaller, thinner atmosphere. Any asteroid striking the surface blows up and sends rock fragments, some of which have velocities that launch them into space. And some of those cross into Earth's orbit and land somewhere. You find a meteorite. How do you know what kind of meteorite it is? You may even see a meteorite fall if you're lucky enough, but don't touch it. Don't ever touch a meteorite that you see has just fallen to the Earth. You're going to freeze your fingers off because it was just in space a few minutes ago.
But doesn't it get hot when it goes down through the atmosphere?
It is through the atmosphere so quickly, the thermal conductivity of the rock is such that, yes, the outside of it gets warm and maybe there's a teeny little bit of melting, but the inside is the coldness of space. Ooh. And these rocks, they break open, and even in some cases, people complain about the stink of the meteorite because it's filled with organic compounds, and it's
they smell.
They smell.
Like what?
Like a kind of burning and oil a little bit sometimes. There's a bunch of aromatic things. I'm sure it's all like very carcinogenic, you know, it's like inhaling car exhaust. But you will see air condense on these rocks if you get there quickly enough. But after finding a meteorite, 3 lines of evidence point to some of these coming from Mars. The first is they come back remarkably young. How can that be? Asteroids are dead objects. There's no volcanism there. I mean, they're old and cold, right? So it's from a planet with some active geology. Okay, that could be Venus, could be Mars, maybe even Earth. Could be an Earth meteorite. Second test. Well, if you do a spectroscopic analysis, you shine light on this rock and you look at the spectra of the light, it matches what we see from orbit of Mars. All right, but how diagnostic is that? There are minerals on Earth just like there are minerals on Mars. But the third test is a really great test. You can take the rock, put it in a vacuum chamber, crush it. The gases released by that rock that are trapped in the minerals and little bubbles and so on inside there, you can sniff with a device called a mass spectrometer, and it matches, both in composition and concentration, the atmosphere of Mars as measured by the Martian landers. That's a smoking gun, people.
Fantastic. Going back to you and your crazy experiences. First, a quick question about the origami structure, and I lost it here, and I need to see it because it was so complex. All right, let me just ask something else. It just like literally disappeared.
Otherwise, we'll talk about entropy and complexity.
Yes. For the okay, there it is. Okay, so you mentioned that a rigid origami-like habitat is proven to be impossible. Is it true that any random is that true for any random shapes, and is it due to the unfolding? I don't know how anyone can be interested in that, but let's unfold that.
It's true for closed volume origami shape with rigid panels. So paper is not a rigid panel origami shape. Paper is actually quite malleable. You can twist it, you can stretch it, you can bend it. So origami with paper, I mean, that's why you do origami with paper, right?
Yeah, but don't you make a huge compromise with the durability of the material? I mean, we're talking about conditions that are, I mean, it's not Greenland, it's much worse.
Yeah, so rigid panel origami has a lot of benefits because a rigid panel allows for solar panels. So, and there are things you can do with rigid panels that are very difficult with, like a soft shell, like the Bigelow module, if you're familiar with that. The Bigelow module is like an inflatable that has a Kevlar reinforced, like a sandwich of many textile layers, you can say. But you cannot attach solar panels to it. But what we do is we reduce the complexity down from the entire surface of the sheet to the flexible joint. So the flexible joint throughout the seam of the habitat is where it's complicated. And the real issue is if we were to send the same habitat to space, you have many meters of material and interfaces where you need to make it airtight. So the origami habitat that we presented there would need to go through many iterations to be safe for space. But as a proof of concept, and in the extreme Arctic environment, it worked very well.
All right, so can we say that current material science actually provide us with the knowledge and materials to build habitats that are durable enough for the harsh environments of Mars?
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah. I think if we talk about habitation, there's not much difference in a Mars habitat and a Moon habitat. I would say from a mission perspective, the level of autonomy you need for a Mars mission is much more different, but you have the vacuum, you have the temperature fluctuations, you even have a little bit of atmosphere on Mars. The temperatures are a little bit more, you can find places that are actually a little bit more easier probably for a habitat than on the Moon.
Yeah. And just the last one, your last model, it's kind of vertical. It's like 7 meters tall. I mean, it looks like it can like
flip. Bend.
Yes.
Yeah. So
is that stable?
Ironically, the largest force horizontally working on the habitat would be an astronaut running inside the habitat and jumping towards the wall
too quickly.
Yeah, too quickly. So we were thinking about that because there's no wind, right? There's no atmosphere. Right. And on Mars, people say, yeah, but the winds on Mars are incredibly strong. They're not, because there's just below 1% of the atmosphere. So even though they blow very quickly, they have very little force. So I think you will see the future of space architecture is vertical. And I'll tell you why. Last fact. This is something we discovered when, if you look at a door, there's many doors here, and if you have to reserve space in a very tight volume that is a space habitat, and you look at a door it takes up a lot of area, a lot of volume, because it needs to allow for the silhouette of a human walking through. But if you have a vertical tube sticking up and an astronaut crawls up a ladder, you only have to reserve a corridor the size of a silhouette of a person seen from above, if that makes sense. Yep. So it's much smaller. So the wasted space in a vertical habitat is much less. And because you don't have the stability issues that you have on Earth from wind or from currents underwater, now we are working a lot underwater now, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah.
Practical questions related to the habitat that you actually tested. First of all, there's a question about what you ate there. Obviously, protein shakes, quite a lot. I'm kidding, but you can answer that. And the second question is, how did you actually cover your energy demands? For the lights, for the computers, for all of that.
Great question. So, just fun fact for the food, we ate Huel, which is this Huel. It's like it's freeze-dried powdered food, but it's a meal replacement. So it has all the macro and micronutrients you need. And we had about 1/4 ton of powder for that mission. So I'm good friends with Huel because I'm the person that have eaten their product exclusively for the longest.
Doesn't that screw up with your digestive system?
I was fine. I actually liked the reduced amount of choices. It made life a little easier. No, but we did blood work before and after, and funnily, I was healthier after the mission than before. But I think I was just a bit stressed and eating too many pizzas before the mission. What was your second question?
Energy demands. How did
energy demands? Yeah. So when we had sunlight, we had solar power. Great. The Arctic sun is actually great because, as bad as it is in the winter, where there's almost there's basically no solar energy available. In the summer period or the beginning of the mission, we had a lot of solar. And because it's cold, the efficiency of the panels are greater. But we also had a backup generator, and then we had special fuel for the Arctic where you remove the paraffin so it doesn't go solid in your generator, and we ran that in the dark period.
All right. Luca, a couple of questions for you. So first of all, a quick step back to the energy demands for cooling quantum computers. Is it more viable to build a quantum computer in space in order to solve that? And the second question is if you can address your own behavior. It's like everything that you know about cybersecurity. How does that affect your behavior and use of technology? Are you just an average Joe and you just ignore everything that you know, or?
So first question, I have no idea in space. I was actually thinking about it. You know what.
I can answer that maybe because I think it's a misconception, because I was sitting thinking the same right before, but it's a misconception because it is cold in space, but you are surrounded by the best insulating material in the entire universe, a vacuum. So any heat building up in the computer, it would be very difficult to get rid of.
Yeah. Probably, yeah. So the answer is no.
Yes, okay.
About me, so I have a slight schizophrenic attitude to cybersecurity. So on one hand, I'm extremely technological. You know, I have an iWatch, I have a phone, I have an iPad, a Mac, and everything. No Windows. You see what happens if I get close to a Windows machine. So I'm fond of technology, but I'm very conscious of the problems. Right? So I'm very conscious of the fact that there is a larger attack surface because I can be attacked in a number of different ways. So I take precautions. So I encrypt my data as much as I can. I always tell my students, so I teach cryptography at King's College London. I always tell my students the exam, which I write weeks before the day of the exam, is encrypted on my laptop. You shouldn't do it, but if you're actually able to crack into my laptop and get the exam, it's fine. You have passed the module, so it's fine that you actually do it because you have learned enough. So far, I think nobody has succeeded in doing that, at least as far as I know, or maybe they did and they didn't tell me, which would be even more interesting. So as I said, I have this schizophrenic mentality. So I have colleagues. I have a colleague in London, and I'm not going to name him. He's a man. He has 4 or 5 smartphones, which is quite an investment. You know, it's not just the phone that you have to buy, but it's also the SIM card and everything, because he compartmentalizes his life, right? So he has one phone for the work at his university, another phone for all the different things that you have to do with your bank and with your different other accounts out there. Another phone for the relationship with his family. Another phone probably for his mistress. I don't know. I never really asked what he is doing. But he has all these phones and he lives this life. And I thought, I don't want to be that person. I mean, I understand him. And to be fair, he is not wrong. Actually, compartmentalization, so splitting up things, is a good way to achieve more security. But it's cumbersome. I mean, just imagine all the chargers and just imagine, making sure that they're all charged all the time. It's expensive, it's time-consuming, I find it stressful. So that is why I don't do it, but that is why I'm also very conscious about the fact that I could be attacked, the fact that I would probably be a more interesting person to attack than your average Joe, because if you can claim that you have attacked a cybersecurity professor, it's certainly more interesting. But I do online banking. I do pay with my credit card because I don't want to use cash, because cash is a good way to be anonymous, right? Cash cannot be traced, whereas your credit card can be traced, but cash is a nuisance. I've been in Bulgaria now for 3 days, and I don't have a single coin or banknote in your currency because I've been paying with my credit card. And that is a big, big improvement in my life. So I think that I approach it with the consciousness that if I need to do that something that is important, like log into my bank or something like that, I will make sure that I do it in the most secure way possible. So I have very powerful passwords. I am careful, to use a browser that is dedicated, and then I close everything and so on. But that's it.
All right. Now to the bigger questions. Life in the universe. Now, Stephen, you did say that statistics is on our side. But first of all, is there any specific estimate on the probability of life and intelligent life existing in the universe? That's question number one, and it's specifically for you. And then question number two is for the whole panel, about your opinion about the Fermi paradox. So they're sort of related.
So any estimate about the number of life-bearing planets, and then on top of that, communicable civilizations, has to have at least a solution of one. You can play the game. You can say, okay, the number of, the rate of star formation, then the rate of those numbers of stars that host planets, and then planets that are appropriate, and then the number of this fraction of planets that have life on them, and then the fraction of planets that have intelligent life, and then the fraction of those planets that make a technological civilization, and so on. It's a great exercise. It's commonly called the Drake equation, but it was formulated first by Harlow Shapley and others. So it should be the Shapley-Sagan-Drake equation. But be that as it may, we just celebrated the 60th anniversary of it in 2021. And we don't know because we just have that n equals 1. That's our observed sample. However, I told you statistics are on our side. But the galaxy itself is an entity that has been here for approximately, in its current mass, 9.5 billion years, in a universe that's been around approximately 13.7 billion years. This is a lot of time. If I was to pick any star in the sky that I showed you, the average human can see about 2,000 or so stars in a dark night out in the countryside, in a desert someplace. The average age of stars in our galaxy is older than us by 2 billion years. So if there was life on planets around those old stars, which outnumber us, 2 billion years earlier than us, what was the most advanced life form on Earth 2 billion years ago? Cyanobacterium, pond scum. How do you feel being pond scum? Right? That may be the difference. It may be that we are like, maybe not pond scum. Let's cut ourselves a break. All right? Let's call ourselves ants. What if you had an anthill next to a superhighway? Do you think the ants would know that there's a superhighway over there? If they're clever ants, they might know by performing an experiment. They would say, oh, the ground shakes between 7:30 a.m. and 10 a.m. And then it gets quiet again. And then it starts shaking again at about 3:30 all the way to 6. And it does that these days, but then it gets quiet again for 2 days. But then sometimes it's not quiet. But you see where I'm going with this? Patterns. Patterns of behavior, patterns of information, patterns of modes of living. If we are clever ants, we might look for natural phenomena that we don't understand in the universe that has a pattern. Can you think of one? Have you heard of dark matter? It's 95% of the mass of the universe. We have no idea what this is. It surrounds galaxies. We know that because of the effect that dark matter has on gravity, right? Light is bent around the galaxies that we observe, more so than just the observable matter. So the matter is dark, and it has properties we don't understand. But it has pattern. Did you know that? There are dark matter strings that attach to other dark matter.
What?
Yes. Dark matter has a network. What? Yes, it has a network. So it's not just random blobs around galaxies. Furthermore, I'm going to ask you a question. If you think evolution of information is a common feature, right? For instance, a galaxy evolves chemically, a planet evolves chemically, a biological species evolves chemically. Information can evolve, right? We're talking about quantum computing as an evolution from just bits to qubits. And we're looking for a change of state, right? If that's correct, could we apply that kind of thinking to this unknown phenomenon? And what would it tell us? It would say that, well, if you go back far enough, if you look back far enough to the earliest galaxies, do they have dark matter? The answer is no.
Oh, come on. Now you're just scaring me.
I'm
really?
Just telling you, it's just this is observation. So are we clever ants?
Who wants to follow that? Go ahead.
I want to continue that.
Please. On a different note.
On a more cybersecurity note. So what is cryptography? Cryptography is you take a language and you transform it into another language that other people cannot understand unless they know some additional information. So you take a text in English, in Bulgarian, you encrypt it using some keys. The result is a sequence of zeros and ones that people cannot decrypt unless they know the secret. Now, let's assume that there is somebody out there trying to communicate with us. How would we even know that this is happening, first of all? Maybe they have been trying to communicate with us and we simply don't understand the patterns. How do we break cryptography? How did Turing and these other people, for instance, break the Enigma machine, the Nazi Enigma machine in the Second World War? They identified patterns. They took this gibberish, because it was sequences of zeros and ones or of highs and lows, because it was transmitted through Morse code, that they could not understand, and they looked for patterns that allowed them to simplify the problem. To simplify it in such a way that they could start decrypting it. But there is a fundamental difference. First of all, they knew that there was a message that was being transmitted. We might be clever ants and not even know that there is a message out there, that there is a highway out there, because we're too far away or because we don't understand that the vibration is actually a message. So the problem that we need to face, if there is somebody out there trying to communicate with us, is first of all, understand that they are trying to communicate with us. And second, once we do that, then try to decrypt the information, because it will be in a different language. Now, it is interesting to consider the messages that we have sent to space. So the messages that we have sent to space are basically pictures of what is a man and what is a woman. They are some examples of encoded information. For instance, we have sent music to space, because that is the way with which we generate information and with which we transmit information, but it's also a way with which we identify ourselves as a species that is able to generate that. I mean, it is quite presumptuous of us to think that any intelligence out there would be able to communicate exactly in the same way as we do. Why should they have a language that comes out of their body? They could have something else. They could have some encryption algorithm that is complete, or some communication algorithm that for us is encrypted and we wouldn't know the keys. So there are a number of fascinating questions from the point of view of cybersecurity there as well. You can look at it as a cybersecurity problem. You need to decrypt information without having any clue about what it is. Turing knew these were messages that the Nazis were sending. And actually, the way they decrypted them, they found that there was a pattern at the beginning, because every message started with, "Hello, this is the weather forecast." And that was the key to actually then building a computer that was able to decrypt the larger message. And we don't have that. We don't have any idea about what is happening out there. The second problem is define intelligence. You know, we talk a lot about AI these days, but much of what we call AI has no intelligence. It's just replicating things. There is no invention that you would see as a sign of intelligence.
Strict parameters.
Exactly. It's just patterns that are repeated. I mean, large language models mostly work like that. They're not really intelligent. They're just very good at searching, which is not necessarily intelligence. So even defining what would be an outer space or an outer Earth intelligence is a difficult question, because we're not able to define it properly on Earth. Is that a good follow-up to his answer?
Yes, and I'm looking forward to your follow-up on that, Sebastian. I feel exactly the same.
I think great points. No, I always think about the human in all of this, and for me, it's.
Sorry, it's funny because it's true. That's exactly what's going to happen.
And also, I think it's from a great movie.
Yeah.
But I think about the human in all of this, and for me, of course, it's. I have a very in my mind, I cannot imagine with the scale of the universe that there's not life. But for me, it's more interesting to think about. It most likely will be so far away, I'm not sure if they don't reach us, how we will reach them. And then I start thinking space architecture, and I think the pinnacle of space architecture is something called generational spacecrafts. And now we start to get into, then it's borderline, or it's definitely 100% sci-fi. But generational spacecraft is this idea that, let's say that we could come close to traveling with at the speed of light, which is, let's just say we can do that. You know, these aliens might be many, many light years away, more than a human life. So it might be further than, let's say, a 90 or 100 or 200, however long we can live in the future. So that means that we might need to send people that will give birth to a new generation, that will give birth to a new generation. We might do this many, many, many times on a spacecraft traveling to these places. And we are talking about, like, now we are far out in sci-fi, but I think it's an interesting thing to think about. And all of a sudden you need to design a spacecraft where you need to take into account traditions and culture and an entire civilization, a miniature civilization traveling, and there will be spirituality and all these things, and it becomes a very big question, and there are many, many good sci-fi books on that. But that's what I think about. So for me, the question whether or not there is alien life becomes mostly relevant, because in my head, and I don't see the proof for that there's not, in my head it's mostly relevant is if we can reach it, or if they can reach us. And I think a generational spacecraft might not be in my lifetime.
You're certainly part of it, though. Part of the whole
Thank
process.
you, yeah.
They do have Oyster cards, probably.
Yes. All the time I was thinking, by the way, if you allow me just to address the audience, I get to have dinner with these guys tonight. So this is to be part of this community is really a privilege. And then I'm going to ask you if anybody wants to join the club, but this is what you get. You know, it's like having dinner with people like that to blow your minds on after the third rakia or whatever we're drinking. Anyways, as a last question, there was this overarching theme of storytelling throughout this whole event, and I just wanted to ask you. I mean, you are all working in fascinating fields. And there must have been some inspiration or influence, probably early on or not so early in your lifetime, an inspiration from some sort of a story, right? So what were your stories that inspired you to go into the direction that you actually went?
I can start. I resonate very much with your fairy tale kind of stories, because I think for me it's okay. So it's a larger question, but or it's a larger answer. But I think sometimes people underestimate the impact of culture. I think people say, okay, I want to have impact with what I do, but I think, for example, creating a movie might be can have a great impact because you inspire a young generation to go into a field. And I think for me, a lot of the inspiration, when I was a kid, I was incredibly dissatisfied with reality. I thought it was very boring. I didn't understand why there was no Pokemons, and I didn't understand why...
You are so young. That's even more depressing. Okay.
But and I loved Indiana Jones, and the first sci-fi book I read was Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, right. And all I thought about was, how cool would it be to have a library at the bottom of the ocean moving around? Like I think, and I can, and I think a psychologist would probably say, okay, I think that there's a reason for why I'm doing what I'm doing today. But the stories are incredibly important, and I think they don't get enough credit. I read a quote when I was a teenager that said, for my generation, this generation is born too late to explore Earth and born too early to explore our galaxy. And it was the most depressing thing I read. And it actually, for 3 years in my teenage years, I believed this to be true. Until I read a couple of books on Mars and space travel, and there was things going on with SpaceX that kind of realized that maybe in my lifetime we would get back to the moon and we would do space exploration. Yeah, but Jules Verne is probably my favorite.
Jules Verne. Okay, you want to go?
Movies. So I'm the son of a computer scientist, my mother, who started programming with punch cards, and of a theater and movie critic, my father. And among the very first memories that I have is being brought to see movies 3, 4, 5 times a week for free, because my father was there to do the critique. And then, after a while, the people in the movie theaters in Genova, my hometown in Italy, they knew me, so I could get in for free, which is also super cool if you're bringing your girlfriend, because you can show off and you can enter the movie theater for free with her as well. So that was the biggest inspiration for me. And it is. But on a more serious note, we humans are storytellers. I mean, out there you can buy the book by Yuval Harari, for instance, Sapiens. And that book makes a claim that resonates very, very strongly with me. What distinguishes us from other animals is our ability to tell stories. So much so that we tell stories to ourselves, right? There is a good point there about the fact that wars are started because we tell different stories. We tell different stories about religion, about God or gods and everything. And that's what starts war in many, many cases. So we are natural storytellers. I think that as a scientist, and I am a scientist most of the time, it is important to be interested in stories, because stories are the ways in which we actually make sense of things, even of mathematical theorems. And the most beautiful theorems have a story to tell. They have a story that we can attach to it. And then, if you ask me in general, what is the biggest inspiration? Probably I would say the Western films by John Ford were the biggest storytelling inspirations for me, because I love the idea of a Western film because it was very, very different from what I knew in my hometown. Genova is a town by the sea and nothing, and Westerns were a way for me to dream. And the way John Ford and his screenplay writers wrote these films and shot these films, typically in Death Valley in the US and everything, was a completely different world. To some extent, the same kind of experience that you have when you read Jules Verne for the first time. So completely mind-blowing because it was completely different. And he told me that there is, and if you watch these films, in particular, my favorite film of all time is a movie called The Searchers. And it is a movie, obviously, cowboys fighting against Indians and everything. But if you take that away, it is a movie about family, about the importance of family in the environment. And you can't get more human than that.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you for that. You have the final word.
Well, family stories. I was born in New York City to immigrant parents. My father was from Hungary and my mother was from Ireland. Two small countries with beautiful tragedies surrounded by strong neighbors. Sound familiar, Bulgaria?
Oh, yeah.
So it was just us. It was my mother, my father, my sister, and I. All family otherwise was back in the old country. And mentally, my parents never left. Now, growing up in America, you're exposed to a multicultural universe, a panoply of different voices and different experiences. But I was always interested in the story of my family's history. And so I equate storytelling with history. And people's history are different histories for different people and different experiences. And I'm going to take an example from science. There's this concept called the habitable zone. Maybe you've heard of it. It's the distance a planet has to be from the star so that it's not too hot and it's not too cold, but it's in the Goldilocks zone. It's just right where liquid water can be on the surface. And it's the kind of environment that we make portable and take with us to places to keep us alive, right? The habitable zone concept, first paper I read about it was from 1993. But then I dug a little deeper into the history of this story, like I do from the history of my family, and I found out in 1979 there was a paper exactly the same title that this paper referred to. Then I looked at that paper, and there was a paper from 1967 that paper had referred to. And then that paper had referred to some earlier work in general, so I did some searching. You wouldn't believe what I found. Winston Churchill wrote one scientific paper in his life, and it was the outcome of a conversation he had with his science minister. It was a paper on the habitable zone, saying that, well, Earth is just right because of its distance from the sun, and Mars is too cold, and Venus is too hot. I wasn't satisfied because that paper was never published. It was found in his paperwork in his estate. Then I read Principia Naturale by Isaac Newton, not in Latin, no, but in the English translation. It's in there. It's in there. But it was also in earlier work from the Greek classical period. So these ideas that we have, yes, they're truly historic. And if we talk about standing on the shoulders of giants, all of those giants are our ancestors. And 1,000 years from now, 10,000 years from now, I think will be woven into those stories, which are going to be the history of those people, our descendants.
Magnificent. All right. Okay, we'll Thank you for spoiling the moment. All right, well, gentlemen, it was absolutely fascinating and great. It was an amazing privilege to have you all here. Ladies and gentlemen, this is our panel.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're free to go. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.